The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of eastern Afghanistan as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison studied the intelligence briefing one final time. His SEAL team had been tasked with what seemed like a routine reconnaissance mission, but Morrison's gut told him otherwise. The target was a suspected Taliban compound nestled deep in the Kunar Province mountains, where local intelligence suggested a high-value target was coordinating attacks on coalition forces. Morrison's team consisted of 5 highly trained operators, each with multiple deployments under their belts. Petty Officer First Class Carlos Rivera served as the team's medic and communications specialist, his steady hands having saved more lives than he cared to count. Senior Chief Mike Thompson brought 15 years of explosive ordnance experience, while Petty Officers Jake Williams and Tom Bradley rounded out the assault element with their expertise in close-quarters combat and reconnaissance. The helicopter. Insertion went smoothly in the pre-dawn darkness, with their MH-60 Blackhawk touching down briefly on a ridge 3 kilometers from the target. The team moved through the mountainous terrain with practiced silence, their night vision goggles revealing the treacherous path ahead. By first light, they had established an observation post overlooking the suspected compound, a cluster of mud brick buildings surrounded by high walls and guard towers. What they discovered through their scopes made Morrison's blood run cold. This wasn't just a small Taliban cell as intelligence had suggested. The compound buzzed with activity, dozens of armed fighters moving in organized patterns that spoke of military training and preparation. Vehicles came and went throughout the morning, and the team counted at least 40 combatants, far more than their 5-man element could handle alone. Rivera worked frantically with his radio equipment, trying to establish communication with their forward operating base. The mountainous terrain and atmospheric conditions were playing havoc with their communications, reducing their powerful military radios to static-filled whispers. Every attempt to reach headquarters resulted in broken transmissions and frustrating silence from the other end. As the day wore on, the situation grew more dire. Through their surveillance, the team witnessed what appeared to be preparations for a major operation. Weapons were being loaded into vehicles, maps were being studied, and the fighters moved with the urgency of men preparing for battle. Morrison realized they had stumbled upon something far larger than a simple Taliban hideout, possibly a staging area for a major offensive against coalition forces. The team's position, while providing excellent observation of the compound, also left them dangerously exposed. The ridge offered little cover beyond scattered rocks and scrub brush, and the afternoon sun was beginning to work against them. Worse still, their limited ammunition and water supplies meant they couldn't maintain their position indefinitely without resupply or extraction. Thompson spotted movement on a nearby ridgeline through his binoculars, armed figures moving in a pattern that suggested they were conducting counter-surveillance. The enemy knew someone was watching, and it was only a matter of time before they pinpointed the SEAL team's location. Morrison made the difficult decision to attempt movement to a more defensible position, but as they prepared to displace, the sound of voices carried across the valley below. The Taliban fighters had begun moving up the mountainside in a classic search pattern, working their way methodically toward the team's position. With communication still down and no immediate hope of extraction, Morrison's team found themselves in the nightmare scenario every special operations unit trained for, but hoped never to face. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time and options. Rivera continued his desperate attempts to raise someone, anyone, on the radio. His voice remained calm and professional despite the circumstances, calling out on multiple frequencies and using every communications protocol in their arsenal. The static that answered each attempt seemed to mock their increasingly desperate situation, and Morrison began to consider their limited options for escape and evasion. The sound of AK-47 fire echoing from the valley below indicated that their presence had been confirmed. The enemy was no longer searching randomly but moving with purpose toward their location. Morrison gathered his team and began planning their fighting withdrawal, knowing that their training, teamwork, and determination would be tested to the limit in the hours ahead. As the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, the 5 SEALs prepared to face overwhelming odds with nothing but their weapons, their training, and their unshakable commitment to each other. They had walked into a trap, but they weren't going down without a fight. Morrison checked his rifle one final time and prepared to lead his team in what might be their final mission, unaware that salvation might come from the most unexpected source. The first shots cracked through the mountain air like thunder, sending chips of rock flying from the outcropping where Morrison's team had taken cover. The Taliban fighters had found their range quickly, and bullets began striking closer to their position with each volley. Morrison could hear the distinctive whistle of rounds passing overhead, followed by the sharp crack of impact against stone. Rivera pressed himself against the largest boulder he could find, his radio handset clutched desperately in one hand while his rifle remained ready in the other. Any station, this is Trident 7, he called into the static-filled void. We are in contact, requesting immediate close air support and extraction. Grid follows. His professional composure remained intact, even as enemy fire intensified around their position. The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly as more fighters appeared on multiple ridgelines surrounding the SEAL team's position. What had begun as a search and destroy mission for the Taliban had evolved into a well-coordinated attack with the SEALs caught in an increasingly deadly crossfire. Thompson identified at least 3 separate firing positions, each containing multiple shooters armed with automatic weapons. Williams took careful aim at a muzzle flash approximately 200 meters down the slope and squeezed off 2 precise shots. The enemy fire from that position ceased abruptly, but was immediately replaced by increased shooting from the other locations. They're trying to pin us down while they maneuver closer, Morrison shouted over the gunfire. We need to start thinking about displacing to better ground. The terrain around their position offered few advantages for a fighting withdrawal. The ridge they occupied provided good observation, but little cover, and the routes off the high ground led directly into areas where the enemy could easily intercept them. Behind them lay a steep cliff face that would be impossible to descend under fire, while ahead and to both sides, Taliban fighters continued to close the distance. Bradley spotted movement through his scope and called out a warning just as a rocket-propelled grenade streaked toward their position. The explosion showered them with debris and left their ears ringing, but miraculously caused no serious injuries. However, the message was clear. The enemy possessed heavy weapons and wasn't hesitant to use them in the increasingly confined space. "Sir, I'm getting something," Rivera called out suddenly, his voice cutting through the chaos of battle. His radio crackled with a weak signal, barely audible above the static, but definitely human. The transmission was fragmented and difficult to understand, but it represented their first communication with the outside world since the morning. Morrison crawled over to Rivera's position, staying low as bullets continued to snap overhead. The voice on the radio was calm and professional, with the unmistakable accent of someone from the American South. "Trident 7, this is Overwatch. I copy your transmission. Send your location and tactical situation." The signal remained weak and intermittent, but it was the most beautiful sound Morrison had heard all day. Someone was listening, and help might be on the way. Rivera quickly relayed their grid coordinates and tactical situation, while Thompson and Williams continued to return fire at the advancing enemy fighters. The Taliban had grown bolder as their numbers increased, and some were now moving between cover positions in attempts to flank the isolated SEAL team. The sound of their voices carried across the mountainside as they coordinated their assault. "Overwatch, we count approximately 40 enemy fighters in prepared positions. We are taking effective fire from multiple directions and are in danger of being overrun," Morrison reported into the radio handset. "We have limited ammunition and no clear route for extraction. Request immediate air support and medical evacuation capability." The response came back weak but clear. "Trident 7, understand your situation. Help is on the way. But I need you to hold your current position for approximately 30 minutes. Can you maintain your perimeter for that long?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, given the overwhelming odds they faced and their dwindling ammunition supply. Morrison looked at his team, each man focused on his sector of responsibility despite the increasingly desperate nature of their situation. These were warriors who had trained their entire careers for moments like this, and their determination remained unshakable even in the face of almost certain death. Overwatch, we'll hold as long as we can. Just get here. Fast. The battle intensified as the afternoon wore on, with the Taliban fighters growing more aggressive in their attacks. They had apparently decided that overwhelming the small American team was worth the casualties they were taking, and began launching coordinated assaults from multiple directions. The SEALs found themselves fighting for their lives, expending ammunition at an alarming rate, while hoping desperately that their mysterious guardian angel could deliver on the promise of help. High above the battle raging on the mountain ridge, Master Sergeant Daniel Cooper adjusted his position in the massive oak tree that had become his home for the past 18 hours. Cooper belonged to an elite unit that officially didn't exist, a group of specially trained snipers who operated independently in the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan. His mission had originally been surveillance of Taliban supply routes, but the desperate radio calls from the trapped SEAL team had changed everything. Cooper's perch was nearly 800 meters from the firefight, a distance that would challenge even the most skilled marksman. His custom-built rifle, a heavily modified M24 chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum, was capable of precision shots at extreme range, but the swirling mountain winds and heat mirages made accurate shooting incredibly difficult. Through his high-powered scope, he could see the muzzle flashes from both friendly and enemy positions. The sniper had been tracking the Taliban movement since early morning, watching as they established their ambush positions around the ridge, where the SEALs would later take cover. His elevated position and advanced optics gave him a complete picture of the tactical situation, and he had been preparing contingency plans even before the first shots were fired. Now, with American lives hanging in the balance, those plans were about to be put into action. Trident 7, this is Overwatch, Cooper spoke calmly into his radio headset. I have eyes on your position and have identified multiple targets. I'm going to start thinning them out. But I need you to mark your exact positions with infrared strobes so I don't put rounds anywhere near your people. His voice carried the confidence of a man who had made impossible shots before and would do so again. Cooper's first target was a Taliban fighter who had established a position behind a large boulder approximately 300 meters from the SEAL team. Through his scope, he could see the man preparing to throw a hand grenade toward the American's position. The sniper took a deep breath, calculated for wind speed and bullet drop, and gently squeezed the trigger. The heavy rifle bucked against his shoulder, and nearly 2 seconds later, the enemy fighter disappeared from view. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The other Taliban fighters began looking around frantically, trying to identify where the shot had come from. Cooper was already chambering another round and acquiring his next target, a machine gunner who had been pouring sustained fire toward the SEAL's position. This shot was more challenging due to the distance and angle, but Cooper's bullet found its mark with devastating precision. Overwatch, that's 2 confirmed kills, Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. The pressure is definitely decreasing on our eastern flank. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. Cooper could hear the relief in the SEAL team leader's voice, but he knew the battle was far from over. There were still dozens of enemy fighters, and his position would eventually be compromised if he continued shooting. The Taliban commanders quickly realized they were dealing with a highly skilled sniper at long range. They began changing their tactics, using more cover and concealment while trying to pinpoint Cooper's location. Some fighters started moving in patterns designed to draw sniper fire and reveal the shooter's position, while others began scanning the surrounding ridgelines with binoculars. Cooper adapted his strategy accordingly, taking shots only when he was certain of both his target and his ability to remain concealed afterward. His third shot eliminated a Taliban leader who had been coordinating the assault using a handheld radio, causing confusion and disorganization among the enemy ranks. The fourth took out a fighter who had been preparing to fire an RPG at the SEAL team's position. The psychological impact of the long-range shooting was beginning to show among the Taliban fighters. They were now dealing with an invisible enemy who could strike without warning from an unknown location, adding a new dimension of fear to their assault. Some fighters began abandoning their forward positions and pulling back to more secure cover, reducing the immediate pressure on the trapped Americans. Trident 7. I count at least 6 enemy KIA and several more wounded, Cooper reported. They're starting to pull back and regroup, which should give you some breathing room. But I'm running low on ammunition, and they're getting smarter about their positioning. "We need to start thinking about your extraction." Morrison acknowledged the transmission while directing his team's defensive fire. The SEAL team had managed to conserve ammunition during Cooper's shooting, using the respite to redistribute what they had left and treat minor wounds. Williams had taken shrapnel from an earlier grenade explosion, but remained combat effective under Bradley's expert field medical care. Cooper lined up his next shot on a Taliban fighter who was attempting to set up a mortar behind a stone wall. The range was nearly at the limit of his rifle's effective capability, and the target was partially concealed, requiring a shot of extraordinary precision. He controlled his breathing, felt the rhythm of his heartbeat, and fired at the precise moment when all conditions aligned perfectly. The bullet struck the mortar tube just as the Taliban fighter was dropping around down the barrel, causing a catastrophic explosion that eliminated not only the intended target, but also 2 other fighters who had been assisting with the weapon. The blast sent a clear message to the remaining enemy forces about the deadly capabilities of their unseen adversary lurking somewhere in the mountains above them. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows across the mountainside when Cooper noticed a significant change in the Taliban's behavior. Instead of the aggressive, coordinated assault they had been mounting, the enemy fighters were now moving more cautiously and defensively. Many had pulled back from their advanced positions, clearly rattled by the precision strikes that had eliminated several of their comrades from an unknown location. Cooper had fired 12 rounds since beginning his long-range support, scoring 10 confirmed kills and forcing the enemy to completely alter their tactical approach. However, he was down to his last 8 rounds of match-grade ammunition, and he could see through his scope that the Taliban were beginning to organize a more systematic search for his position. Groups of fighters were now scanning the surrounding ridgelines with binoculars and rifle scopes. "Trident 7, this is Overwatch," Cooper transmitted quietly. "I've disrupted their assault, but they're getting organized for a counter-sniper operation. I can see at least 3 teams moving to positions where they can observe my likely hide sites. We need to expedite your extraction before they locate me and resume their attack on your position." Morrison's response came back immediately, tinged with both gratitude and concern. "Overwatch, we copy. You've bought us precious time and probably saved our lives. Our ammunition situation is critical. Maybe 15 minutes of sustained fire left between all of us. Any word on extraction assets?" The SEAL team leader's training kept his voice steady, but Cooper could hear the underlying tension. Through his powerful scope, Cooper could see that the SEAL team's position was becoming untenable regardless of his support. They were completely surrounded, with enemy fighters holding the high ground on multiple sides. Even with reduced pressure from his sniper fire, it was only a matter of time before the Taliban reorganized and launched another coordinated assault that would overwhelm the small American team. Cooper made a decision that went against every principle of sniper doctrine he had ever learned. Instead of remaining concealed and picking his shots carefully, he was going to create maximum chaos and confusion to cover an extraction attempt. He switched his radio to a different frequency and began calling for immediate close air support, using his credentials to cut through military bureaucracy with urgent priority codes. Any fast-moving aircraft. This is Overwatch 7-7 with troops in contact. Danger close situation," he transmitted on the emergency frequency. "I have 5 Americans surrounded by approximately 30 enemy fighters at grid Papa Tango 427896, requesting immediate air support with precision-guided munitions." While waiting for air support to respond, Cooper resumed his deadly work with renewed intensity. He began taking shots at a faster pace, accepting slightly less perfect firing solutions in exchange for maintaining continuous pressure on the enemy. His targets included anyone who appeared to be in a leadership role or operating crew-served weapons that posed the greatest threat to the SEAL team. His next 3 shots eliminated a machine gun team that had been attempting to reestablish a position with clear fields of fire toward the Americans. The Taliban fighters were now clearly aware they were dealing with an exceptionally skilled marksman, and Cooper could see them pointing in various directions as they tried to coordinate their search efforts. Some were even firing blindly at potential sniper positions on distant ridgelines. "Overwatch, this is Viper 2-1, F-16 flight of 2 with mixed ordnance. came the response that Cooper had been hoping for. "We're approximately 5 minutes out from your location. I'll need precise coordinates for both friendly and enemy positions. And I'll need you to talk us on to target, since you have the best observation of the tactical situation." Cooper quickly provided the detailed information the fighter pilots needed, including precise grid coordinates for the heaviest enemy concentrations and clear marking of the SEAL team's defensive perimeter. He also briefed them on wind conditions, terrain features, and the most effective attack headings to maximize the impact of their precision strikes while ensuring the safety of the American forces on the ground. The sound of approaching jet engines began to echo off the mountain walls, causing both American and Taliban forces to look skyward. Cooper could see enemy fighters scrambling for better cover, knowing that their exposed positions on the mountainside made them vulnerable to air attack. Some began attempting to flee toward the cover of nearby caves and dense vegetation. "Viper, 2-1, this is Overwatch. I have you in sight," Cooper reported as the F-16s made their initial pass over the area. "Priority targets are the machine gun positions on the eastern ridge and the mortar team behind the stone compound. Friendlies are marked with infrared strobes on the northern ridge. You are cleared hot on all targets outside the friendly perimeter." Cooper watched through his scope as the lead F-16 rolled into its attack run, the pilot's precision evident in the smooth, controlled approach. The 500-pound precision-guided bomb struck the eastern ridge with devastating effect, eliminating an entire squad of Taliban fighters who had been preparing to assault the SEAL team's position. The explosion sent shockwaves across the mountainside and rained debris on the remaining enemy positions. The second aircraft followed immediately, with another precision strike on the mortar position, silencing the crew-served weapon that had posed the greatest indirect fire threat to the Americans. The psychological impact of the airstrikes was immediate and dramatic, with many Taliban fighters abandoning their positions and attempting to flee the area entirely. "Trident 7, this is Overwatch," Cooper transmitted as he watched the enemy forces disintegrating under the combined pressure of his sniper fire and the devastating airstrikes. "The cavalry has arrived, and the bad guys are starting to run. Start preparing for extraction because I can see helicopters inbound from the south." The distinctive sound of rotor blades cutting through mountain air grew louder as two MH-60 Blackhawks approached the battle zone at high speed. Cooper could see them through his scope, flying nap of the earth to avoid any remaining enemy fire, while heading directly toward the SEAL team's position. The extraction helicopters had arrived at the perfect moment, with Taliban forces scattered and demoralized by the devastating airstrikes. "Trident 7, this is Guardian 1-6, came the voice of the lead helicopter pilot over the radio. "We have 2 birds inbound for immediate extraction. Pop smoke to mark your landing zone, and be prepared for a fast rope insertion of additional security forces. We're coming in hot and we're not staying long." The pilot's tone conveyed the urgency of the situation and the dangers inherent in landing helicopters in an active combat zone. Morrison quickly deployed colored smoke grenades to mark their position while his team prepared for extraction. The remaining Taliban fighters were attempting to regroup for one final assault, knowing that this might be their last chance to eliminate the American forces before reinforcements arrived. Cooper could see several enemy fighters moving through cover toward positions where they could engage the incoming helicopters. Cooper made his remaining ammunition count, targeting enemy fighters who posed the greatest threat to the extraction operation. His shots were now focused on anyone carrying surface-to-air missiles or rocket-propelled grenades that could damage or destroy the helicopters. Each shot had to be perfect, as there was no margin for error with friendly aircraft operating in the area. The first Blackhawk flared for landing on the ridge where the SEAL team had been fighting for their lives, while the second aircraft provided overwatch and security. 8 Army Rangers fast-roped from the security helicopter, immediately establishing a defensive perimeter around the landing zone. Their fresh energy and ammunition gave the Americans a decisive advantage in the final phase of the battle. "Overwatch, this is Guardian 1-6, the pilot called over the radio. "We've got our people, but we're taking some ground fire from your direction. Are you going to need extraction or can you make your own way out?" The question highlighted Cooper's precarious position, alone on the mountainside with limited ammunition, and an increasingly determined enemy searching for his location. Cooper considered his options quickly. His hide site had served him well throughout the engagement, but it was becoming increasingly dangerous as Taliban search teams worked their way up the mountain toward his position. His extraction would require precise coordination to avoid friendly fire incidents, as the Rangers and helicopter crews wouldn't be able to distinguish him from enemy fighters at a distance. Guardian 1-6, I'm going to displace to alternate extraction point Alpha, Cooper transmitted, referencing a predetermined helicopter landing zone approximately 1 kilometer from his current position. Give me 15 minutes to move, then. I'll mark with infrared strobe. But first, let me help you get out of here safely. Cooper used his last 4 rounds to eliminate Taliban fighters who were attempting to engage the helicopters with small arms fire. Each shot was carefully chosen to protect the extraction operation and ensure the safe departure of the SEAL team and their rescuers. His final round struck a fighter who was preparing to fire an RPG at the departing helicopters, ending the immediate threat to the aircraft. Trident 7, this is Overwatch, Cooper called to Morrison as the Blackhawks lifted off with their precious cargo. It's been an honor serving with you today. Stay safe and I'll see you back at base. The transmission carried the mutual respect that exists between warriors who have fought together against overwhelming odds and lived to tell about it. Cooper quickly broke down his position, packing his rifle and equipment with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed this routine countless times in hostile territory. He could hear voices getting closer as Taliban fighters continued their search, and he knew his window for escape was rapidly closing. Moving carefully through the dense forest, he began working his way toward the alternate extraction point. The journey to the extraction site required all of Cooper's survival and evasion skills, as enemy fighters were now spread throughout the area looking for the sniper who had disrupted their assault. He moved silently through terrain that provided concealment, while avoiding the obvious routes that the enemy would likely observe or booby-trap. Every step had to be calculated and precise. 15 minutes later, Cooper reached the designated landing zone and activated his infrared strobe to signal the extraction helicopter. The Black Hawk appeared almost immediately, its crew having maintained orbit in the area specifically to recover the lone sniper whose deadly accurate fire had saved the lives of 5 Navy SEALs. The helicopter touched down just long enough for Cooper to sprint aboard, before lifting off into the safety of the evening sky. As the helicopter climbed away from the mountainside battlefield, Cooper looked down at the scene where he had spent one of the most intense days of his military career. Smoke still rose from the positions that had been struck by precision airstrikes, and he could see scattered Taliban fighters retreating toward their vehicles and escape routes. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the larger war continued. Overwatch, this is Guardian 1-6, the pilot said over the aircraft's internal communication system. I don't know what your real name is, but I want you to know that 5 families are going to see their loved ones come home because of what you did today. That kind of shooting was something special, and those SEALs know they owe you their lives. Cooper simply nodded and settled back in his seat, his rifle secured beside him, and his mission complete. He had done what snipers were trained to do: provide precision fire at critical moments when the stakes couldn't be higher. Today, that training had made the difference between life and death for 5 American warriors who had found themselves trapped far from home in the mountains of Afghanistan. 3 weeks after the mountain rescue operation, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison sat in the briefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman, looking across the table at a man he had never expected to meet face to face. Master Sergeant Daniel. Cooper appeared much younger than Morrison had imagined, with the quiet confidence that marked elite military operators. The formal debriefing had been completed hours ago, but both men had requested this private meeting. I've been doing this for 12 years, Morrison began, his voice carrying the weight of numerous combat deployments. I've been in situations where we needed help, and I've been in situations where we provided help to others. But I've never experienced anything quite like what you did for us up there. 16 confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 800 meters under combat conditions while coordinating airstrikes and extraction operations. Cooper shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly not accustomed to such praise. I was just doing my job, sir. You and your team would have done the same thing if the positions were reversed. We don't leave people behind, and we don't let good men die when we have the ability to help them. That's not about individual heroism. That's about the brotherhood we all share. The official after-action report had documented the engagement. In clinical military terms, enemy forces eliminated, friendly casualties avoided, mission objectives achieved. But the human story behind those statistics was more complex and meaningful. 5 American families had avoided the devastating phone call that every military spouse fears, and that reality wasn't lost on either man sitting in the small briefing room. Morrison learned that Cooper had been operating alone in the mountains for nearly 2 weeks, gathering intelligence on Taliban supply routes and communication networks. His mission was supposed to be purely surveillance, with strict orders, to avoid contact with enemy forces unless absolutely necessary. When he heard the desperate radio calls from the surrounded SEAL team, Cooper had made the decision to abandon his original mission and intervene. "The interesting thing is that I almost missed your radio transmissions entirely," Cooper explained. "I was monitoring different frequencies for my intelligence mission, and I only picked up Rivera's calls because I was scanning channels looking for enemy communications. If I hadn't been doing that specific task at that exact moment, I never would have known you were in trouble." The conversation revealed the incredible series of coincidences and split-second decisions that had aligned to create the successful rescue operation. Cooper's position in the mountains had been chosen for intelligence gathering, not sniper support, but it happened to provide perfect observation and fields of fire for the area where the SEAL team became surrounded. His custom rifle and match-grade ammunition had been intended for different targets entirely. Morrison handed Cooper a small package wrapped in brown paper. "This is from the team," he said simply. "We know you can't talk about most of what you do, and we know your unit officially doesn't exist. But we wanted you to have something to remember us by, and to know that 5 families are grateful for what you did, even if they'll never know the details." Cooper unwrapped the package to reveal a custom-made challenge coin bearing the SEAL trident and an inscription that read, "Guardian Angel, Afghanistan 2010, Brothers in Arms." The coin was heavier than standard military coins, clearly made from precious metal, and the craftsmanship was exceptional. It was the kind of gift that meant more than any official military decoration. "There's something else," Morrison continued. "We put you in for the Silver Star. I know your unit probably won't let you accept it publicly, but the paperwork is in the system, and the story is documented. Someday, when classifications are lifted and operations are declassified, people will know what you did up there in the mountains." Cooper held the challenge coin for a long moment, feeling its weight in his palm. "I appreciate this more than you know, sir. In my line of work, we don't get much feedback about whether our actions made a difference. We take our shots, file our reports, and move on to the next mission. It means everything to know that this one mattered." The 2 men shook hands in the manner of warriors who had shared combat, each knowing that their paths might never cross again, but that the bond forged in the mountains would endure. Cooper returned to his classified missions in the shadows, while Morrison and his team continued their direct action operations against high-value targets throughout Afghanistan. Years later, when both men had returned to civilian life, they would occasionally exchange emails on holidays and military anniversaries. Cooper eventually became a law enforcement sniper trainer, passing his hard-earned skills to a new generation of precision marksmen. Morrison retired from the Navy and started a consulting business, helping train corporate security teams and law enforcement tactical units. The official records of the operation remained classified for national security reasons, but the human impact of that day in the Afghan mountains continued to ripple through the lives of everyone involved. Wives welcomed husbands home safely, children grew up with fathers who might otherwise have never returned, and 2 warriors who had never met before that day formed a friendship that would last the rest of their lives. In the end, the story of the desperate SEALs and their guardian angel sniper became one of those legendary tales that circulate quietly through the special operations community. It serves as a reminder that in the most dangerous places on Earth, American warriors look out for each other with a dedication that transcends unit boundaries, service branches, and mission classifications. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, whispered through static-filled radios by voices that speak with calm authority in the midst of chaos.